Very well done. What about this gentleman, top left-hand corner? Anybody know who that is? Rembrandt van Rijn. Well done. Rembrandt, bottom left-hand corner. Pablo Picasso. Very well done. Getting a little harder now. Does anybody know who this is? I'll give you a clue. His initials are MC, and it's not Escher. Mark Chagall. Mark Chagall. Very well done. Now, finally, this gentleman. It is not Winston Churchill, as somebody said recently. Anybody know who that is? How many of you heard of Joan Miró? Joan Miró, the famous Spanish surrealist. We just set sail, of course, from his birth town in Barcelona. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, these again are some of the most influential artists in our history. And I want to find out from you what it is that you think sets them apart from the rest. Why do you think they are some of the big names of art history? Shout out some answers. Unique style, I love that. Any other answers? You know what, I'm going to stick with that answer because you've hit the nail on the head. Innovation. All of the artists behind me are either the leaders or the fathers or the founders of entire art movements. In other words, they were creating the footsteps for others to follow in. They weren't following in anybody else's footsteps. Quite simply put, monumental movements equals monumental artists. And I'm going to cover some of these movements today. I'm also then going to cover some of the artists who made these movements possible. Ladies and gentlemen, hold on to your seats right now. We're going to travel back 30,000 years in time. The oldest form of painting is cave painting. Now, I got this slide off of the internet. I found it quite amusing. Two cavemen standing in front of a cave painting. They're having a conversation, and the one says to the other, I think that it explores the interface between pigment and rock, momentum and stasis. Now, do you think that that's a conversation cavemen would have been having 30,000 years ago? Probably not, right? But who knows? You never know. Look at this next slide, though. This is my favorite. Little caveman drawing on his wall, right? But what's on his head? Little French beret, as if he was sitting around one day and he thought, oh, I think my cave needs some more color. Decided to paint his wall. The reason I bring these slides up is I wanted to find out from you what it is that you think the reason is that cavemen created art. Why do you think they painted? Shout out some answers. To tell history, to document history, to tell stories, yes? Any other ideas? What's that? To tell where you catch the biggest bull. Okay, fancy to brag a little bit, right? Sort of men's fishing stories. Maybe some of these bulls were a little bigger than they really were, right? I'll let you know that you're all on the right track. Many studies have been done on some of the earliest cave paintings found in La Salle in France, of course. Any Aussies in the room? Australians? Yes, some of you will know that Aboriginal cave paintings predate even some of these paintings, and we're talking about 50 or 60,000 years of art history in that case. I will let you know the studies done on these paintings will show that in many cases it was to document history. In other words, cavemen would go out and have a successful hunt, and they would come back and they would paint that successful hunt on their wall. I will let you know as well, art historians believe that it was for the purposes of magic, the purposes of superstition. What I mean by that is they think, cavemen believed, if they painted a successful hunt on their wall, this would give them a better chance of going and having a successful hunt. Why did they believe this? Well, because when you study these paintings, right around the head and the heart of the animal, there are little indentations, as if they stood there stabbing at the rock, stabbing at the animal, throwing spears at it before they went out and hunted. If that's true, that means that superstition has been around for a long, long, long time. Is superstition still prevalent today? Absolutely, right? What's a good example? Maybe baseball. Baseball players, they're quite superstitious. Some of them wear the same stinky old socks week in and week out until they lose a game, right? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, moving forward, I want to ask you a question. I'd like you to vote either yes or no by raising your hand in the air when I prompt you to do so. Bill Gates, who is one of the richest men in the world, if he wanted to buy a cave painting, how many of you think, yeah, he could probably buy a cave painting? Hand in the air if you say yes, he could. Okay, hand in the air if you think no, he could not. Okay? The answer is, of course, no, he could not. There has never been a cave painting for sale. There is never anticipated to be one for sale. Perhaps he could buy the island that one existed on, not sure, but could not buy a cave painting. Moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to get to the next art movement that I want to cover for you. Before I get to that movement, in between comes Egyptian art, which is very flat. It's two-dimensional. It remains unchanged for more than 2,000 years. We then have Greek art, which is very methodical. We have Roman art, which is based on antiquity, but it is all paving the way. It is all leading up to a time when the world woke up. They realized the power of the beauty of art, and it is known as the rebirth of art, also known as the Renaissance. The Renaissance, known as the rebirth of the art world, and of course, one of the most influential art movements in the history of art. Can you name me some big painters from this time? Michelangelo? Leonardo da Vinci, very well done. Anybody else? How many heard of Titian? Botticelli, right? How about these guys? Anybody heard of these guys? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? Donatello, Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo. Do you know that, quite interesting fun fact for you, this cartoon was created by two guys studying art history in the 1980s in graphic design. They came up with this cartoon about Mutant Ninja Turtles fighting evil, but they named all the characters after the big Renaissance painters, and I think that's cool, because if I go to a 10-year-old boy around the ship and I say, hey, can you name me some painters from the Renaissance? He's going to say, dude, I don't even know what the Renaissance is. But if I say to him, can you name me the Ninja Turtles? He'll say, yeah, sure, Michelangelo, Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, Surf's Up, Cowabunga, woohoo! 10-year-olds talk like that still? That's how I used to talk. I don't know. Moving forward, folks, let's talk about what the Renaissance was all about. How did it come to be? What were some of the driving features of the Renaissance? In the early 1400s, the Catholic Church had a lot of the power, a lot of the influence, and they came up with a concept. That concept was to have artists come and paint big, beautiful murals, frescoes on their cathedral walls. The idea was that they would paint heaven on earth. The idea was that when people came to church, they'd see this beautiful art, they'd become inspired, and they'd want to become Catholic. That was the idea. Now, the king and the queen at the time, they said, hang on a minute, we're the king and the queen, we need to have bigger and better art. So they would get an artist, he would come and he would paint bigger and better art. The church would say, no, we're the church, we need to have bigger and better art. And so there was this war back and forth. Now, it was never a physical war, more of a material war, but this is how the Renaissance really got underway. During this particular time, we saw some of the underpinnings of modern art established. We saw, of course, the invention of oil painting on canvas. Before this time, artists used mainly wood, tempera, and of course frescoes, painting on walls to create art. Now we saw the invention of oil painting on canvas. We also saw the invention of chiaroscuro. Chiaroscuro is the fancy word for the contrasted effect of light and dark. Invented mostly by Leonardo da Vinci, this allowed painting to have depth. Chiaroscuro. The next invention, of course, is the pyramid configuration with regards to placement of objects in art. And then, of course, finally, we're going to see perspective. Perspective now, the introduction again of three-dimensionality when it comes to fine art. Ladies and gentlemen, those underpinnings established during this particular period, mostly by Leonardo da Vinci and his peers, and of course, Michelangelo. How many of you have been to see the Sistine Chapel? Okay, how many of you are going to see the Sistine Chapel? Phenomenal. How many of you, what did you think of that? What did you think of the Sistine Chapel when you saw that? Breathtaking, unbelievable, awe-inspiring, magical what the human mind can conceive. What about the Mona Lisa? How many of you have seen the Mona Lisa? And what did you think when you saw the Mona Lisa? Small, 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 small. That kind of is the general consensus, right? Would you agree that this is arguably the most famous painting in art history? Would you agree that it has been made larger than life in our minds? So when you go to the Louvre, you expect big Mona Lisa. What you get is a big wall, teeny weeny little Mona Lisa. However, of course, one of the most famous paintings in art history. Why? Because of your eyes that follow you, this technique called sfumato is the shadiness, the smokiness in the eyes that allows it to have the illusion that it follows you, looks at you wherever you are. Sfumato also invented during this particular period. Now, folks, it took me about 2 hours to learn how to make that spin, so I'm going to show you again. Time well spent, I do think. Moving forward from there, there's a photograph of me and the Mona Lisa in the background. And ladies and gentlemen, of course, Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, if he wanted to buy a painting by Michelangelo, how many of you say yes? Hand in the air. How many of you say yes, he probably could? Okay? How many of you say no, he could not? And how many of you are not going to put your hand in the air no matter what I ask? Thank you for your honesty. The answer to that question is no, he could not. There has not been a painting by Michelangelo for sale in the recent past. Never anticipated to be one for sale in the future. No, he could not. However, let's say, for example, that you do like Renaissance style art. Are there artists today still creating using this particular method? Absolutely. Us at Princess Fine Art, we represent two of the world's most famous Renaissance painters of our time. Number one, the gentleman in the back, Thomas Root, and number two, Csaba Markus. Csaba Markus, in fact, is the artist who painted this particular work of art behind me. These two artists are Renaissance painters in the style of Renaissance painting in today's art world. Now, was that? Oh, yes. If you're timing this, hit pause really quickly. Safety officer just popped his head around the corner. Remind me to do a quick safety announcement. We are in muster station here. How many of you have made it to the outer decks of the ship already? Okay, good. I will let you know, I'm sure you've noticed that as you open up the doors to the outer decks, particularly here on deck number 7, have you noticed that when you walk out, when you open the door, there's a strong gush of wind? Have you noticed that? Well, about 10 minutes ago, a lady did walk out of one of the doors here on deck 7, and before that, this lady was fully clothed. The jokes aren't going to get too much better if you're expecting more. Ladies and gentlemen, moving forward from there, of course, Michelangelo and the others clearly inspired the likes of Thomas Ruth, Chava Marcus, and Renaissance painters of our time. But it is all about the inspiration. It's about the innovators of art. Moving forward, folks, let's talk about the next art movement that I want to cover for you. In between this movement and the next movement, there are, of course, a group of artists that revolutionized the world of art, and they play on, they advance all of the techniques used by the Renaissance artists. But the next art movement that I want to talk to you about is the Baroque period. Now, the Baroque period came about, ironically, as this was the first time artists were becoming extensively paid to create art. I will let you know at this time, because of that, art became very intense, very emotional. It was filled with drama, became very realistic. What are we talking about here? Well, I'll let you know that in Holland, at the time, of course, one of the major trading routes in the world, it became very, very popular for a wealthy family to commission an artist, for that artist to come and, of course, paint a portrait of the person that commissioned it. Of course, the more money you had, the more famous the artist you could commission, and in many times, the more money you paid, the better looking you became. Ladies and gentlemen, again, because of this, art became very realistic, very emotional, very drama-filled, and one artist in particular advanced the play of light and shadow, chiaroscuro, invented by Leonardo da Vinci, elevated by Caravaggio in post-Renaissance, but perfected by the man I call the leader of the Baroque period. Anybody know who created this? Rembrandt van Rijn. Very well done. Rembrandt. This painting for an extra raffle ticket. Who can name it? Give her an extra raffle ticket at the back there. The Night Watch is hanging in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Anybody been to see that? Okay, if not, put it on your bucket list. Phenomenal. I was recently in Amsterdam, visited Rembrandt's house. What an incredible experience. This particular man, the most famous artist of his time, went bankrupt twice in his life, lost 3 of his 4 children before he passed away, lost his wife Saskia, and all of that played an integral part in the art that he left behind. Rembrandt painted more portraits than any other artist still in history, and except now maybe for John Philip Sargent and Peter Max as well. However, I will let you know that this particular artist, Rembrandt van Rijn, also painted many self-portraits. This one hanging at the Louvre, and this one on the left, another example thereof, and the one on the right, one more example thereof. Now, the reason I bring these 2 examples up is to let you know that I want you to know the reason that we know the name Rembrandt is more so in many cases because of his etchings than it is because of his paintings. How many of you are familiar with the word etching? Okay? Etching is a 500-year-old method of printmaking used as a copyist tool before Rembrandt turned it and established it as an art form. Rembrandt etchings are highly sought after works of art in the world of art. The painting on the left, I want to let you know, is a self-portrait of Rembrandt, but I want you to garner a guess at how old he was in this portrait on the left-hand side. How old would you say Rembrandt is? Shout out to Monsters. 50? 60? You're very close. I'm going to get back to you. 60, 50, 65. Okay, I'll let you know. He was 30 years old. Rembrandt was 30 years old in this particular portrait. Why does he look the way he does? Well, Rembrandt pioneered and invented a technique that allowed him to paint, of course, people from the inside out, known as psychological portraiture. Rembrandt, if he came to paint you, thought you were beautiful on the outside, but ugly on the inside, would paint you from the inside out. Can you imagine that might have angered quite a few people? You went to Rembrandt and all of a sudden he added 10 years to your life, right? The opposite of what the doctors here in the Medi-Spa will do. And of course, he angered quite a few people, and this almost led to his bankruptcy. That painting of the Night Watch that you saw was meant to represent officers and gentlemen. Instead, he represented them in that chaotic manner, as you did see. Rembrandt van Rijn, one of the most famous painters in art history. How many of you believe Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, could buy a painting by Rembrandt? How many say yes? How many say no? Okay, the answer is yes, he could. There has been a painting by Rembrandt for sale in the recent past There is even anticipated to be one for sale in the near future. Very exciting times for the world of art. But you're talking about millions and millions of dollars for a painting by Rembrandt van Rijn. Moving forward to the next art movements focus, how we're going to get there is we're going to compare these two artworks. The one on the left, the one on the right. When you are comparing them, one of the things I bet you do not say is, wow, look at the color on the painting on the left-hand side. Because I will let you know, at the time of the Baroque period painting, color wasn't a great feature of painting. They used a lot of earthly tones, coppers, browns, etc. And it wasn't until the next artists came about that they explored the boundaries of color, the boundaries of light, and they were, of course, the Impressionists. How many of you are familiar with the Impressionists? Okay? Can you name me some of the big Impressionist painters? If you need some help, they're on the bottom of the screen. Monet, Renoir, Degas, Cézanne, Manet. Very good, right? Two different artists, Monet, Manet, one with an O, one with an A. Of course, the Impressionists, ladies and gentlemen, the hallmark of their painting, big, bold, spontaneous brushstrokes. No more clear, defined lines. Why do you think this came about? Well, I'm going to tell you. At the time, the camera has been invented, and so there is no reason anymore for people to pay artists to come and paint their portrait. So, of course, they have to think outside of the box. So here's what the Impressionist does. Looks at a waterfall, for example, takes a snapshot of that waterfall in his mind's eye. Then, taking his paintbrush, using bold, spontaneous brushstrokes, he'll paint, but then of course he has to run back over here so you can see it nice and clearly. Then he'll run back up and he'll paint, and then run back over here so you can see it nice and clearly. And that's why it's a well-known fact that all Impressionist artists were skinny. Not true. Ladies and gentlemen, I would say, of course, Monet, Manet, two different artists. The leader of the Impressionists is Monet. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, he created the artwork that Impressionism was named after. It's called Sunrise Impression. How many of you are familiar with this artwork behind me? Okay, this artwork currently hangs, I just saw it recently, the British Museum of London, okay? It's at the British Museum of London. Anybody been there? Such a cool art museum. If you haven't been, go check it out. This particular painting hangs at the British Museum of London. And looking at this painting, how many of you think to yourself, wow, that is rebellious? Close your eyes. Don't look. Children were leaving. Anybody feel that way? Do you know that when Impressionism came about, that is what was thought of their art? It was outlawed. There was a salon governing art called the Salon of Paris in France. They basically determined, art was submitted to them, it was determined what they would display. During this particular period, a great number of artists were submitting paintings in this impressionistic style. Artists were so shunned because, as an artist, of course, you were judged based on how well you could conceal your paintbrush lines, where the hallmark of Impressionism was showing those brushstrokes. And so many of these paintings were submitted at this time that they had to make a separate hall for the exhibition of these Impressionists, but they called it the Salon des Refusés, which means the exhibition of the rejects. Do you know that it was said that if you went to an exhibition of Impressionism and you were pregnant, that you would lose your child? It was called the devil's art. How many of you now believe that Impressionism is probably one of the most popular forms of art in our history? Okay? Evidence of that is that many of the most expensive paintings in the world today are Impressionist paintings. Many of you are familiar with the name Van Gogh, right? Van Gogh, anybody familiar with that name? Pronounced correctly, Van Gogh. Just like that, okay? Let's just practice that. Van Gogh. Well done. Next time you go to the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam, make sure to say it just like that, okay? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, Van Gogh was post-Impressionist, used a heightened sense of color, but I will let you know many of the most expensive paintings in the world are by this man, Van Gogh. I will also let you know that many expensive paintings in the world by Monet and Renoir. Does anybody want to garner a guess at what the most expensive painting in the world is? How much do you think? Shout out a guess. This painting sold in 2014 by Paul Gauguin, $300 million. $300 million for a painting. How many think that's nutty money? Right? The royal family of Qatar, by the way, that was not the first painting that bought of that particular price point. About 2 years earlier, they purchased a painting by Paul Cézanne for $250 million. Unbelievable, right? Anyway, moving forward, ladies and gentlemen, are there artists, of course, that paint in the style of Impressionism still today? Absolutely there are. In fact, there are many. And one that I'm going to talk to you about really quickly is the artist on the right-hand side, Michael Mavrovich. He's a California Impressionist. Some others in our collection that many of you will be familiar with, Sam Park, Victor Schweiko, and other great names of importance with regards to their influence on Impressionism in the world that we live in today, but clearly inspired by Monet and others. Moving forward from there, folks, let's talk about the next art movement that I want to cover for you right now. One that some of you would have heard of, some of you might not have. It is Fauvism. How many of you have heard of Fauvism? Anybody heard that word before? Good. I'm very glad, Roxana, that you've heard that word. Fauvism. The word fauve is French. It means wild beasts. They were known as the wild beasts of color. They were known for their disregard of conventional color. What I mean to say is a Fauvist came along and he said, you know what, these Impressionists, they think the grass is green and the sky is blue and the birds are singing, everybody's happy, tra-la-la-la-la. Well, we want to shake things up a little bit. We want to paint the grass bright, bright orange, and we want to paint the sky bright green. We want to use non-representational use of color. Why? To create emotion. How many of you agree that color is tied very much to emotion? Would you say? Yes? The artist who created this movement said, and I quote, I believe God created color not for us to recreate nature, but for us to express emotion. Anybody know his name? The painting in the back might give it, in the background might give it away. How many of you heard of Henri Matisse? Henri Matisse. This particular painting, The Dance, hangs at the Hermitage Museum in Russia, and of course is one of the most famous paintings that hangs in that particular museum. Henri Matisse created, invented Fauvism. Other artists are part of this art movement. Sauvage, of course, another very, very famous one, and Matisse, responsible for this movement. Created in 1904, ended in 1908, only lasted about 4 years. Why? Well, it was overshadowed by another artist, by another movement that I'll cover for you in a bit. However, it was reinvented, reinvigorated, revived in the 1950s by two artists in particular. On the right-hand side, on either side of the middle work of art, Itzhak Tarkai. How many of you are familiar and have collected or maybe heard of Itzhak Tarkai in the room? Hand up, nice and high. Okay, large majority of you, fantastic. Itzhak Tarkai, one of the most influential figurative artists in the world today, and of course a Fauvist. Itzhak Tarkai, here we have an example of his artwork. This is an original acrylic painting on canvas, only one in the world. Absolutely fantastic, Itzhak Tarkai. In the middle, Marcel Mouly, the last artist to have studied alongside Pablo Picasso. Marcel Mouly. Now, these two artists are in many ways the founders, or not the founders, rather, the invigorators, the reinvigorators of the movement of Fauvism. Fauvism is Mouly and Tarkai. Moving on to the next art movement that I want to cover for you right now, invented by arguably the most famous artist in our history, certainly the most famous artist of the 20th century, the artist who revolutionized every single form of art that he touched, said to have lived 8 artistic decades, 8 artistic lifetimes rather, during his life. His name, anybody want to guess? Picasso. Pablo Picasso. Would you agree with me, saying he is the most famous artist of the 20th century? Without a doubt. Right? The name Picasso is synonymous today with art. Picasso was born in 1981 in Malaga, in Spain. Sorry, not 1981. 1881. He died in 1973. How many of you had thought that he was alive while you were alive? Right? 1973, that's not that long ago. Many of us were around still at that particular time. Pablo Picasso is an artist of our time. And he's the most famous artist, I would say, in art history, Pablo Picasso. Now, what particular movement is Picasso most associated with? What is the movement he invented? Anybody want to guess? Cubism, very good, much better. Last cruise somebody said squarism, I don't know where they got that from. Cubism, it is. And Cubism would shatter, would completely defenestrate all of the rules established by the Renaissance painters many, many years before. You see, Picasso not only threw out the window the rules regarding lines. He threw out the window the rules regarding perspective. He threw out the rules regarding everything to do with art before this movement. And in very many ways, it represented the time. How many of you are aware that between 1880 and 1920, the world changed drastically, right? We saw the invention of electricity. We saw the invention of the steam engine. We saw, of course, religious ideals, moral values changing, shifting drastically. And artists of this time were holding a mirror up to that society. Well, Pablo Picasso is the artist who held that mirror up the longest. For 8 decades, Picasso was the center point of art, around which all other artists would, of course, become inspired. Pablo Picasso. What is the idea of Cubism? Here is an example of Picasso creating one of his great works of art. This is an example of Cubism. This is a portrait of Henri Kahnweiler, one of Pablo Picasso's great art dealers. And you can see his face, you can kind of see his hands over his lap. This is what's known as synthetic Cubism. Of course, the idea is that one would take a vase, for example, hold that vase in the air, smash it on the ground. As you were seeing it before, you saw the front and maybe one of the sides. Well, now I'm going to piece it back together on a flat two-dimensional surface so that you can see the entirety of that object on a flat two-dimensional surface. The idea of Cubism. Now, there is another example of Cubism. It is called analytical Cubism, and it is where we get collage from. The best way for me to describe it is for you to think of Mr. Potato Head. But think of Mr. Potato Head has been in a bar fight. So now his ear is over here, his nose is over here, and his eyes are down here. That is analytical Cubism, and it is where we get collage from. How many of you have created something using collage in your life? Okay? Collage comes from the French word coller, which means to glue, and it was invented by Pablo Picasso and Georges Braque. How many of you knew that? Phenomenal. Picasso had an incredible impact on the world, not only of fine art, but in the world in general. After Picasso, people looked at fashion differently. They looked at architecture differently. Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you think Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, could buy a painting by Picasso? The answer to that question is yes. The most expensive Picasso sold at auction is in fact the highest price ever paid for an artwork at auction. The one I mentioned previously was a private sale, $179 million. $179 million. The ladies of Algiers. The record for a Picasso before that, $155 million. The record before that, $106 million. Would you agree that even though he passed away in only 1973, for the most part, for many of us, owning a Picasso original one-of-a-kind painting is probably out of the question? It certainly is for me. Okay? However, Picasso created a great body of work in the form of original prints. And so fortunately, there is still a window of opportunity, a bracket of time, in which we can still own a work of art that has been touched, signed by the great master Pablo Picasso. And if you want to know more about that, come and chat with me a little bit later. But moving forward right now, let's move to the next art movement I want to cover for you right now. We are nearly done. It is Surrealism. How many of you heard of Surrealism? Okay, who would you say is the greatest surrealist of all time? Salvador Dali. Very well done. I will let you know, Dali did not invent Surrealism. It was invented by a guy named André Breton. André Breton was a writer. The movement of Surrealism was in fact a writer's movement. It was then adopted by artists. Dali was initially shunned by the Surrealists. They said, no, you possess too much painterly technique. He was later hailed as the greatest surrealist of them all. Another great surrealist, of course, Joan Miró. From Barcelona, Joan Miró was hailed as the most surreal of them all. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about Miró later on this cruise, because I need to give him the due time, the due diligence on his own. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a bit. But the idea of surrealism is that our dreams become art. This particular painting, how many of you are familiar with it? Persistence of Memory by Dali. You can see the melting clocks, the desolate landscape. How many of you knew that there was a portrait of Dali in this painting? Let me point it out to you. Here's his forehead, there's his nose, his eye, his moustache, no mouth, and his chin. Can you see that? A soft self-portrait of Salvador Dali in the Persistence of Memory. How many of you have been to see this painting? If you think the Mona Lisa is small, man, how big is this painting? It's about this big. Right? By Salvador Dali. The idea again that our dreams become art. How did Dali tap into his subconscious. The ideas of Sigmund Freud, differently from anybody else, and I don't recommend that you try this at home. What Dali would do is deprive himself of water, of food, and of sleep. So much the opposite of what you're going to do this cruise. He would then sit himself down in a chair, grab a metal spoon, hold it over a metal bucket, have his canvas and his brushes ready next to him, and when he could not keep his eyes open anymore, the spoon would drop, clank, 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 it would wake him up, and he'd grab his brush and he'd start to paint. That is called a hypnagogic state. He would paint from that state, and it would only last a few seconds. He would then repeat the process, grab the spoon, clank, 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 wake him up, begin to paint. And he would do this all night long until he completed a painting. Sometimes hundreds, sometimes thousands of times. How many think maybe Dali was an alcoholic? How many think maybe he was on drugs? How many think maybe he was just insane? I'll let you know that only one of these answers is really true. Dali was, in fact, a very prudent businessman thanks to his wife, Gala. How many of you know that behind most successful men is a surprised woman? Salvador Dali, ladies and gentlemen, very rarely drank. He very rarely did drugs. In fact, there's a famous quote by Dali. He says, "I am drugs." But I will let you know that he did go insane in the latter part of his life. His wife, Gala, died. He locked himself in a tower, became a recluse, set himself on fire, got burnt on over 80% of his body, and became insane in the latter part of his life. However, he did leave an incredible world of art behind for us. The Dali Museum, the largest one thereof, is in St. Petersburg, in St. Pete, in Florida. Right? A fantastic museum if you've not been to that. Surrealism, How Dreams Become Art. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about the last art movement that I want to tell for you right now. And it is the one, whether we like it or not, that we are all responsible for, and it is pop art. How many of you heard of pop art? Okay? The idea that popular culture, popular icons can be used to create art. Who would you say are, I'm looking for three artists that were the fathers, the founders of pop art. Who would you say they are? Andy Warhol, Peter Max, very well done, Roy Lichtenstein. Andy Warhol, Peter Max, and Roy Lichtenstein. I'm going to give two more credits. These two artists died young, and they were street artists. They don't always get the credit I think they deserve, but Jean-Michel Basquiat and Keith Haring. Also, of course, two great contributors to the birth of pop art in the 1960s. The idea, again, taking popular culture, popular icons, and using that to create art. Now, Andy Warhol, known as a pessimist, and a painter of irony, right? What he did was display what he did not like about society. So the Campbell soup cans was him painting, poking fun at consumerism and the fact that everybody was buying into it so easily in the 1960s. Then you get artworks like this by Peter Max. He, on the other hand, paints what he likes about society. And this is typically what pop artists do. They mirror society and paint either what they like or what they do not like about society. For myself, I'm kind of a glasses half full kind of guy, so I kind of tend to lean towards the artwork of Peter Max versus Andy Warhol. But ladies and gentlemen, art, at the end of the day, is a conversation with history. It's a representation of time. It is about your interaction, ladies and gentlemen, and that is 30,000 years of art history in 30 minutes. Now, I do know what is going to happen. At the end of this talk, people are going to come up to me and say, well, Wayne, you know, you forgot about post-impressionism, post-renaissance, post-impression, modernism, Dadaism, pointillism, stick figureism. The point is that there are many other movements of fine art. As somebody from North America, I might add, probably the most important one for you is abstract expressionism. How many heard of that? Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, Arshile Gorky, right? They were the reason that the focus came off of Europe and moved over to the United States with regards to the world of fine art, where much of it still is today. New York City is probably the artistic hub of the world. In fact, evidence thereof was that just a couple of weeks ago, two paintings broke the collective sale price record. A Jackson Pollock sold for $300 million, equaling the Cézanne, and a Willem de Kooning for $200 million. The sale, a private sale to one owner, $500 million for an artwork. Isn't that unbelievable? Unbelievable. but it just goes to show what people will pay to preserve history of the groundbreakers, the ground makers, the movers and the shakers, and that's the guys that I spoke about today. These are the artists who have set the tone for what's to come. Now, we know where art comes from, but do we know where art is going? The next question I have for you has no right or wrong answer. I just like to hear what you might have to say. Where do you think the future of art will be? Where do you think the future of art lies? Shout out some answers. What do you think? Color? Okay, so the exploration, the boundaries of color maybe being further explored. Digital? Well, how many of you believe that? Digital photography, computer-generated imagery. Yes, future in that? I believe so. Any other ideas? Political comment, okay? That's not really new, but maybe we're getting back to where we're doing that, right? I'll talk about political comment. You know who the first artist was to really explore that? Goya. How many heard of Francesco Goya? The first modernist of our time, really. Some people call him the last old master. Some people call him the first modern master, Francesco de Goya. And by the way, just in case you were wondering, do we carry art of that sort of magnitude on board? We do. You see these two artworks on the right-hand side of these two easels? Those are two original etchings by Francesco de Goya, created in 1799. Haven't charged you to come into the room today. Absolutely free to go and enjoy those immediately after this talk. I want to let you know, folks, that there is one person, in fact, in this room who, without shadow of a doubt, knows where the future of art will be. And that's me. What? Don't laugh, I'm serious. And what happened was, this morning, I had a wonderful night's rest after I joined everybody here on the Royal Princess. Anybody sailing from last cruise? Okay, a couple of us in the room. I joined the Royal Princess yesterday when all of the rest of you did as well. I flew over from the Baltics where I was on the Regal Princess, the sister ship to this. But last night, I had a wonderful night's rest, woke up this morning, and I had a premonition. Like I had this epiphany, and I want to share it with you, okay? Because I don't think that I should keep this to myself. I want to share it with you. You've been a great audience. Do you want to hear? Not enough enthusiasm. I'm not going to tell you. Do you want to hear? Yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe the future of art will be Tuesday at our live Champagne Art Auction right here in the Vista Lounge. Dun, 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 dun. Anyway, folks, I will let you know that at 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, which is not tomorrow, it's the day after, is our only day at sea, and will therefore be our only auction. Okay, so we've got one auction. What does that mean? That means we're going to pull out all the stops. We're going to bring out almost our entire collection into the Vista Lounge. It will be one of the most enthralling, exciting, and invigorating events of your cruise. I think that if you have not attended an auction, you're going to be attending this one, and it will become one of the highlights of your future cruises. If you have attended an auction, come and join us for this one. We're going to share our passion for the world of art with all of you in the best way that we can. It's going to be at 1:30 p.m. here in the Vista Lounge on Tuesday. What time is it? No, it's 11:45. No, 1:30 p.m. Where is it going to be? Vista Lounge right here on Tuesday. So make sure you do come and join us for that, ladies and gentlemen. On that note, we're going to end up, but what I want to do really quickly